Hi everyone, I hope you're okay. So one of the things that was recommended from our literacy specialist visit the other week was to try and use smarts or PowerPoints for our phonics lessons. And the reason for this is because the Smart or PowerPoint will give us the structure and it will help to prompt teachers of the next point of the lesson, and it will also help to ensure effective pace. You don't have to teach everything straight off of the Smart or the PowerPoint. You can be creative, you can incorporate your own individual teaching style. So if you want to model on the whiteboard, say, or if you would like to use flashcards, that's absolutely fine. But we are asking that you please create a PowerPoint or Smart for each phonics lesson. And I know many of you already do this, so it's really just a quick fix. So I did promise that I would go through an exemplar PowerPoint or Smart just to show you the expectations and what should be included on your phonics Smart or PowerPoint. You can use PowerPoint or Smart. I've just chosen to use PowerPoint here because I like the interactive features, and I will send out this PowerPoint as well in case you want to use any of the flashcards or any of the animations that I've used as well. I've adapted this from a Smart that Hannah sent me. I've just tried to include some of our Candleby Lane features, so we've got our new lesson planning format with the reactivate and the teach symbols, so I've just incorporated those onto the slides so it's consistent with all of the presentations that we're using for our other lessons. So the first thing is, you can see on this slide we are sharing the learning objective, which is really important so the children know what the aim of the lesson is. So for this one it's to read and write the split file diagram A. So you share that with the children, and then I've included here the reactivate symbol so that it's really clear to the children what part of the lesson this is, and it's clear to yourself as a practitioner. And phonics is quite good because it kind of follows that structure that we've been trying to work on for our lesson planning recently. So the reactivate, the teach points, the apply points are all kind of in there anyway. So at this point we would share our flashcards. You can use the physical flashcards, that's absolutely fine. I have got them here as an animation just because I prefer to have things up on the screen, but again, like I say, you can have your own individual style for this. You could simply write at this point on this slide flashcards, just so you know I'm going to do my flashcards now. Something that I keep going on and on about is to select individual flashcards to sort of plug the gaps for your learners rather than using the whole deck. So what I've done for this one is, because I've predominantly been working with Year 1 recently, I've just sort of identified some of the sounds that Year 1 is struggling with, as if I had my own class, if that makes sense. So then you would go through your flashcards. You would show the flashcard, give the children a few seconds to say the sound themselves. If they're mispronouncing it, correct their pronunciation. So I'm going to do that now just to sort of model how that would be done, but I'm sure you know, so it's kind of self-explanatory. So we go through, give them a few seconds, and then you say the sound just to correct them in case they're mispronouncing. So and then I'll just flick through them. I'm sure you don't need me to pronounce every single sound. So the reason I've done it like this is just because I feel that most of my learners will be able to see the cards on the screen. So you'd go through. And then we'd still be revisit our reactivate point right now, and we would look at tricky words. So because I've been working with Year 1, like I said, I've got the phase 5 tricky words up here. What you could do is you could do your AFL and identify some tricky words that your class is struggling with and include them, or you might want to just focus on a couple of tricky words for the lesson because you really want to include that teaching point. So you go through the tricky words, give the children a few seconds to say these words, just correcting them if they don't pronounce it correctly or say it correctly. So there we go. And again, just going back to those, if you want to use flashcards, that's absolutely fine. I've already explained the reasons why I've put it on the screen, so again, you can incorporate your individual style to this. And then something that Hannah's recommended is to have a tricky word of the day. Foundation are doing this already. I've seen it on their reading and writing mats, which is great. And you need to have a look at what makes it tricky. So I'm hearing a lot of teachers when I'm going into classes saying we can't sound out tricky words, what you should be telling the children is you can sound it out, but we haven't got the phonics or we haven't learnt the phonetic rules for it yet. Because all of the tricky words you can sound out, it's just we haven't learnt the spelling rules or the alternative sounds. So you'd talk about what makes it tricky. So you'd say to the children, if we look at the digraph that we recognise, ow, it's not actually making ow, it's making a sound. And we'd also point out we've got a silent L, so that's what makes it tricky. And then we'd move on to our teach point. So I've included here our traffic light system that we're using on our lesson planning, and I've seen this being used on some of the maths and English lessons, so I think it's really important with that consistency just to have that on there. So you would share with your children the sound that you're learning today, and one of the things that Hannah recommends is to say it, see it, and then read it and write it. So you do it in that order. So what you would do first is say it to the children, and I've included on here an animation. So I've said my turn, just to consolidate that my turn, your turn, because I've noticed when I'm working with a few children, they don't really understand the my turn, your turn system. So I've just put it on there just to make it really clear. So it would be my turn, A, your turn. And I do this 3 times. So my turn, A, your turn. Okay, so we'd go through, do it 3 times. And we'd also explain that this is a split vowel digraph to the children. So we've got this dash in the middle. That means that there's going to be a letter, a consonant in between. Okay, so the sound goes across. I mean, you could model that. So if you've got a pen or your interactive whiteboard pen, you could show, look, that goes across there. So explaining to the children the rules for that sound. Okay, so then moving on to the next slide. So then the children are going to have a go at writing it now. So we've seen it, we've said it, we've seen it, we've read it, and now we're going to have a go at writing. So I've adapted this from Hannah's slides. It says you've got 1 minute to write our phoneme for today as many times as you can, and just reminding them of finger spaces. The class teacher to model this first, okay? So you've got some examples already, but as a class teacher, imagining you've got your pen available, you would, it's not the best handwriting, you would model how to do that first, so that the children can see what you want them to do. So to give them a minute to do that, this needs to be really pacey, really fast, and then use your assessment for learning. So just have a quick look at whiteboards, or if you're doing this on the reading and writing mats, have a quick look at reading and writing mats. Just make sure that the children have forming it correctly, and really draw attention to that dash, because that consolidates the fact that there's a letter in between, that the sound goes across a letter. Okay, and then we might talk about what other A sounds do we already know, what have we already learned, just to connect that to previous learning. So we've got our A that we're learning today, and we've got a picture clue just to help them think of some words, and then you could write a word for each of these ones. So we've got our other digraphs, and then we've got our GPC here, and obviously that can make A and A, so you might want to talk about the fact that it's got an alternative sound. So write at least 1 word for each of those, just to make those links to phonics families. And then what A words can you think of? And I think it's really important at this point to have some visual stimuli on the board, and that's something that Hannah really recommended. So on here I've got pictures, so plane, cake, whale, shape, snake, game. And get the children to give you a few suggestions. And you're just saying these at the moment, you're just talking about them. And there's a note here that Hannah left on her smart. It says if they said some that use alternative sounds, so AI, AY, A, then just say same sound but different spelling, just to keep the children's enthusiasm up. And then you would move on to modelling reading. So here I've got on my slides different words. But this can be done with physical cards, okay? So if you want to use flashcards, or if you want to model on the whiteboard, you can do that. And Hannah recommended that these words are the first 3 or 4 words on your reading mat, just so that the children have got that part guided, and then they can do the rest of the words on the reading mat independently. I have mentioned, but I'll just remind you now, that if you're in F2, there should be 12 words to read on your reading mat, and then about 3 sentences. If you're in year 1 or year 2, there should be 20 words on your reading mat and a paragraph. Okay, so this would link into that. So then you would model to the children how to do it. And I would start off by saying, can we spot the split vowel digraph first? Give them a few seconds to try and spot it, and then you would model it. So it's your turn first. So you'd use your pen to put the sound buttons on. Bake. And then their turn. So I think I've put animations on, if it will let me. Yeah, so spot the digraph first. So I've put these animations on really just for a prompt for myself. My turn, and then their turn to have a go. And something that Ellie used that I really liked was to use your phonics finger. So you could get the children to sort of point in the air, putting the sound buttons on, just to try and reinforce that. So then you would move on. But for this time, you would say spot the digraph, give them a few seconds to find it, and then it's just their turn, because you don't want to be sort of spoon feeding them. So they would have a go, and you could use the phonics finger again. So you'd go through these, spot the digraph, just repeating it over and over. Okay, and then it would be time to read. I've taken this from Hannah's reading mat, so you can notice I've not used the first 3 or 4 words, sorry. So learn from my mistakes, please. But it should be. So if I had planned this carefully, it should have been name, game, shame, lake as your first 4. You're going to do that together, and then the children are going to do the rest independent. Okay, so moving on. So then, just to go back a bit, sorry. So you would then send the children off independently to have a go at this reading mat. So you can see I've put on the slide the green traffic light, so that means this is independent work. Obviously, class teachers circle the room, provide support, be assessing the children so far. But yes, this is where they go away to their tables, or if you do it on your carpet space, I know they do that in foundation, that's what you should be doing at this point. Just a few things to point out on the reading and writing mat. They've included their tricky word, they've got an example of split vowel digraph A, and as you can see, this is for year 1, so there's 20 words, and then there's a paragraph, so really important that you include that. And then when the children have had enough time to have a go at this, I would probably say about 5 minutes. You obviously read the room, see how much support they need or how long they need on this. Bring all the children back together, and you're going to focus on the writing part of the lesson. So then this is going to be guided again. So have the visual stimuli to help the children understand what the word is. And then Hannah has put a little note here. So the high are able to try this independently, and the lower able to use a phoneme frame. Now this could be done on whiteboards, or you could have phoneme frames laminated for your lower able or your bottom 20 to use, or you might want to do the first 2 perhaps off your writing mat. Okay, so then you would model how to do it. You might want to use robot arms first. So remember that Bex passed on to me that when we're reading, we're using the fingers to do the sound buttons and then swish to blend, but when we're spelling, we can use the robot arms. So you might want to get your whole class to sound it out together, and then you would model putting it in. So I've just put animations in, but you could do this physically with your interactive whiteboard pen, or like I said before, you could model it on your whiteboard if you want to. So then showing them how to spell in the phoneme frame, and then showing them outside of the phoneme frame, just so that they can link that with how to spell without the scaffold, if that makes sense. So again, you would just repeat this. So I've got several other ones, and you just keep going through and use this opportunity for assessment for learning. So keep looking, if you're doing it on whiteboards or laminated phoneme frames, keep looking at what the children are doing. See if you can spot any misconceptions. If misconceptions are cropping up, then address them then and there. Same if they're doing it on their writing mats. Okay, so at this point, the children would go off and they would do their writing mat. This part here could have been at the start of the teach point, where the children were practicing having a go at forming split vowel digraph A. But like I said, you could do that on whiteboards as well. But there's just an opportunity there for them to practice it. And we've got our visual stimuli, we've got our phoneme frames to help them, so the children write each of the words, so game, whale, stage, grave, race, in the phoneme frame, and then they're expected to write it without the phoneme frame to consolidate that on these lines. And then they've got 1, 2, 3 lines to write a sentence of their own using these words that they've learnt. So they would have a little bit of time to do that writing mat. Again, class teacher to circle the classroom, provide support, spot any misconceptions. If you have a teaching assistant in your classroom, they could be working with the bottom 20% to do this writing mat as well. I think Mel does that in foundation, which is great. Okay. Then when they've had time to do that, bring them back together to write a guided sentence. So this is sort of your plenary opportunity, and it will allow you to do that assessment for learning, see if they can apply that sound into their spelling. So you would think of a sentence together first. We've got a visual stimuli here. So it might be to do with a cake, it might be to do with baking, so you'd discuss that, and then you'd come up with a sentence together. So the one we're going to use here is I bake a chocolate chip cake, and count that on your fingers. I think that's a really good strategy because it helps the children to remember how many words do I need to write, and they do that really well in foundation. It's something that I've magpied from foundation to use when I'm teaching. So do that guided sentence together. You would model how to spell. Obviously I've used an animation here, but if you were actually in class, you would go through the process of sounding it out, identifying the tricky words, and writing it on the board or the whiteboard, and then children to come up with their own once done. High able to write independently, but you're lower able, you could support to do this, and then use that AFL opportunity at the end of the lesson to have a look at, can they apply the spelling rules, the phonetic rules to the sentences that they've wrote? Are they incorporating tricky words? And use that sort of judgment to inform your future lessons. Okay, so that is an example of a SMART or a PowerPoint, so I hope that that's helpful. I'm sure it's very similar to what you're doing already, but it's just good to see sort of what Hannah expects from us and what we should be incorporating into our lessons. I will send the PowerPoint that I've made just in case anyone wants to use it for the animations like the flashcards and stuff like that. And I hope that was helpful, and enjoy the rest of your day.